She was a high-powered designer racing up a mountain road with no idea her life was about to hang by a thread. Until a twist of fate, a crashing SUV, and a stranger with a piece of timber stopped everything. What followed wasn't just survival. It was the beginning of a love story no one saw coming. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe, hit that like button, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Make sure to watch this video till the end, because in the final moments you'll see the journey from an entirely new perspective. Now let's jump into the story. The road curled like a ribbon through the Blue Ridge Mountains, silent and golden in the afternoon light. Trees, dressed in copper and amber, lined the steep cliffs. One side of the road hugged the mountainside, firm and strong. The other dropped, suddenly into a deep valley, wide and wild, with nothing but space between the asphalt and the trees below. Lena Hartley gripped the steering wheel of her SUV with one hand and tapped a finger against the screen on her dashboard with the other. Her Bluetooth earpiece buzzed with voices. Her assistant, her marketing director, and someone from Paris talking about runway samples and delivery delays. "Lena, they've moved the client call up by an hour," her assistant said. Her voice rushed and shaky. "Can you jump on Zoom as soon as you're back?" "I'm on a mountain road with 0 bars, Lena said, frustration bubbling just under her voice. "Tell them to wait or send the mock-ups without me." "Are you sure?" "Yes, Ivy. Handle it," Lena replied, her tone clipped. Her eyes flicked between the winding road, the GPS, and a set of messages lighting up her dashboard screen. She barely noticed the quiet beauty outside, how the sun warmed the pines, how the wind brushed the edges of the forest like a lullaby. She was a woman of movement, always chasing the next thing. The mountains were just another backdrop. Then it happened. A flash of brown. A blur across the pavement. A deer, startled by something in the trees, leapt into the road. Lena gasped, twisting the wheel hard to the left. The SUV's tires shrieked in protest. Rubber met gravel and the car fishtailed, swerving dangerously close to the edge. "Oh no, no, no," she cried, slamming the brakes. But it was too late. The back tires lost grip. The front of the vehicle tilted forward, and the road disappeared beneath her. Her assistant's voice screamed through the earpiece, "Lena, are you okay? Lena!" But the scream was drowned by the rush of blood in her ears and the terrible crunch of metal against stone. Down the slope, maybe 50 yards away, Micah Rowan had just loaded the last of the firewood into the back of his pickup. He had spent the morning repairing a chicken coop for his elderly neighbor, and he was thinking about what he might cook for supper. Maybe beans and cornbread, maybe stew if he still had carrots. The sudden scream of tires made his head snap up. He turned just in time to see the silver SUV slipping sideways over the edge of the road. No hesitation, no question. Micah ran. Grabbing the long timber beam from the back of his truck, he sprinted uphill, his boots pounding against gravel, his breath short and fast. As the SUV dipped forward, its nose almost vertical, he wedged the heavy beam beneath its front axle and leaned it against a thick rock outcrop on the mountain's inner wall. The vehicle groaned under its own weight. Dust and leaves swirled in the air. For a moment, Micah thought it might slide anyway, but it didn't. It stopped, tilted, damaged, but still on the mountain. Inside, the woman was still. Her head rested against the seat. A thin line of blood trickled from her hairline. Micah climbed to the door, yanked it open, and leaned in. "Miss," he said, his voice calm and low. "Can you hear me?" She didn't answer. Her breathing was quick, her hands limp. Micah checked her pulse, strong, but fast. A bruise was already blooming on her shoulder. She was lucky, very lucky. The sun was lowering fast. The roads would soon be shadows and ice. The nearest hospital was over 2 hours away, and cell service didn't exist up here. He made a decision. Micah gently lifted the woman into his arms and carried her to his truck. He placed her in the passenger seat, wrapped a thick wool blanket around her, and buckled her in. The road to his cabin was narrow and rough, but he drove it like he knew every stone and turn. And he did. His cabin sat at the edge of a clearing, surrounded by pine trees that whispered to each other in the wind. The porch creaked under his boots as he carried her inside. He laid her gently on the couch near the fireplace. The room smelled of cedar and fresh pine. Handmade shelves lined the walls, filled with books and carved figures. The fire crackled softly, its light warm and gold. Micah stoked the flames higher, then fetched a bowl of warm water and gently cleaned the cut on her forehead. He didn't know her name, didn't know where she came from, but that didn't matter right now. He set a mug of peppermint tea beside her just in case she woke. Then he sat in the armchair nearby, watching the tension slowly fade from her face, her breath deepening with rest. "You're safe now," he whispered. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the tall pines. Inside, the cabin held stillness. Safe. Quiet. Alive. And though he didn't know it yet, Micah had just stepped into a story that would change both of their lives forever. Lena woke to the scent of wood smoke. Her eyes blinked open slowly, meeting a ceiling made of old pine beams and soft shadows. The light was golden, filtered through linen curtains that swayed gently in a breeze. Her body ached, shoulder sore, head heavy. But she was alive. She sat up slowly, a thick wool blanket slipping from her shoulders. Around her was a room that felt like something from another life. The furniture was handmade, rough but beautiful. A fire crackled in the stone hearth. A cup of tea sat untouched on a small table nearby. For a moment, Lena just stared. This was not her penthouse. This was not glass and steel and polished surfaces. This was quiet. Too quiet. Panic rose in her chest like a tide. She reached for her phone. Dead. She plugged it into the USB cable tucked in her purse. Still nothing. No signal. No bars. No Wi-Fi. She stood, wincing as her bruised shoulder protested. The floor creaked beneath her bare feet as she walked to the door and flung it open. Outside, the mountain air hit her like a wave. Sharp, clean, cold. She stepped out onto a small porch where chickens clucked softly in the distance, and a breeze carried the scent of pine and earth. Somewhere behind the cabin, tools clinked gently. She followed the sound. Micah was in a small open-air shed, sleeves rolled to the elbow, sanding a piece of wood with slow, steady movements. He glanced up when he heard her. "You're awake," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. Lena crossed her arms, her voice sharp. "Where am I?" "My cabin," he replied simply. "You crashed. I brought you here. No offense, but I need to leave. I have meetings. I have people looking for me." Micah nodded toward the valley below. "Doctor came by early this morning. Roads blocked, landslide. Won't be cleared till tomorrow, maybe the next day." Lena stared at him as if hoping he'd suddenly admit he was joking. "That's not possible." "It is." Her jaw tightened. She didn't like this. Being helpless, disconnected, unseen. She was Lena Hartley, head of Hartley and Rue Designs. She ran a company. She didn't sit around in wooden cabins waiting for roads to open. But Micah said nothing more. He simply handed her a folded towel. "Breakfast is inside," he said. "You should eat." The table was set with fresh bread, warm eggs, and a jar of honey that glowed in the morning light. Lena hesitated. Back home, breakfast came in branded smoothie bottles and overpriced lattes. But here, the smell of the bread made her stomach growl. She sat down stiffly and began to eat in silence. Micah joined her, saying nothing. He simply folded a soft cloth and gently tucked it behind her back. She looked at him, startled. "I'm not an invalid." "No," he said calmly, "but your shoulder's bruised." His quiet tone made her pause. She didn't reply. After breakfast, Micah returned to the shed. Lena paced the cabin like a restless cat. She tried her phone again. Still dead. She flipped through a book she found on the shelf. She stood by the window, watching the wind blow through the trees. By noon, the silence started to shift. It no longer felt like a cage, it felt like a space. Curious, she stepped back outside and made her way to the shed. Micah was now carving something small, a figurine of sorts. "You do this every day?" she asked, arms crossed. "Most days," he said without looking up. "Wood doesn't fix itself." She watched as he measured and trimmed a piece of timber, the lines of his work careful and clean. "How do you know where to cut?" Micah paused, ran a hand down the grain of the wood. "You listen," he said. "It tells you." Lena blinked. Something about that, something so simple and strange, made her chest tighten a little. "You ever tried it?" he asked. She laughed softly. "I work with diamonds and platinum. I don't carve wood." "Still design, though," he replied, placing the carving knife down. "Just slower." She didn't answer, but her curiosity had been hooked. That afternoon, Micah let her hold a small chisel, showed her how to find the grain, how to let the blade follow, not fight. She carved a shaky line through a scrap of cedar. It wasn't good, but it was calming. Later, she sat on the porch, the little cedar piece in her hand, her mind surprisingly quiet. That night, she couldn't sleep. Not because of the mattress, soft and warm, or the fire that glowed in the hearth, but because for the first time in years there were no alarms, no meetings, no expectations, just silence. A kind of silence that let her hear her own breath, her own thoughts. Micah walked past her room once, holding a lantern. He paused when he saw her sitting up. "You okay?" She nodded. "I don't know how to sit still," she said. "Then don't sit still," he said with a soft smile. "Just breathe." Then he walked on. She lay back, staring at the ceiling, the carved beams, the firelight dancing on the walls, and somewhere between one breath and the next, Lena fell asleep. Not because she was tired, but because she finally felt safe. The rain came early the next morning, soft at first, then heavier, sheets of water tapping the tin roof above Lena's borrowed bed. She blinked awake to the sound of footsteps outside her room and the faint smell of something warm cooking. Her body still ached, but not as sharply. Her shoulder throbbed in a dull, manageable way. Then she remembered. She was still here, still in the cabin, still disconnected from the world she'd once controlled with a swipe and a signature. Micah's voice drifted down the hall. "Doctor's here." A few minutes later, an older woman in a thick raincoat stepped through the doorway carrying a worn medical bag. Her silver hair was tied into a bun and her voice was calm. No nonsense. "Name's Dr. Imani Hayes," she said as she knelt beside the couch Lena had moved to. "Let's take a look at you." The checkup was quick. No broken bones, just bruises, a slight concussion, and, Imani added with a small smile, a good excuse to rest. Lena nodded, half listening, until the doctor zipped her bag and added, "By the way, the road's washed out again. Another landslide last night. You'll be here another day or two at least." Lena sat up, her heart kicking a little harder. "Another day?" Imani gave her a sympathetic look. "I'll let Micah know if anything changes." When the doctor left, the cabin felt unusually still. Lena paced the living room, eyes scanning the table, the mantel, her overnight bag. And then, suddenly, her breath caught. "My necklace," she whispered aloud. She rushed to the bedroom, then the bathroom. She checked the floor, the couch cushions, her bag again, emptied every pocket, every fold of fabric. It was gone. It wasn't just any necklace. It was a small, delicate silver chain with a daisy charm, worn thin over the years. Her mother had given it to her on her 16th birthday, the last birthday before the cancer hit. It had been with Lena through college, through her first design pitch, through the launch of her company. And now it was gone. She dropped to her knees and searched, under the bed, her hands shaking. No, it was here," she whispered. Micah stepped inside just then, holding a cup of tea, his brow furrowed. "Something wrong?" Lena looked up, eyes wide and lost. "My necklace. It's missing. It's all I have of my mother." He Didn't speak right away, just stepped forward and gently placed the tea on the table. "If it's here," he said quietly, "I'll find it. I promise." Something about the way he said it, calm, sure, softened the panic in her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, her throat tight. 2 days later, the weather cleared, and with it, the road. A rescue vehicle arrived early in the morning, its lights flashing faintly through the trees. The driver, a young man in uniform, helped Lena carry her bag to the truck. Micah didn't say much. He stood by the porch, hands in his pockets, watching her every step. There was no hug, no drama, just a quiet sadness neither of them spoke aloud. The truck pulled away. Lena looked back. Micah raised one hand in a small wave. She didn't wave back. Not because she didn't want to, but because her chest ached too much to move. Back in the city, everything was exactly as she'd left it, and completely different. Emails flooded her inbox. Her name was tossed around in meetings. Her office. Windows still overlooked the city skyline. But it all felt like watching someone else's life through glass. She answered calls, reviewed designs, smiled when she had to. But something was off. She missed the sound of chickens in the morning, the smell of pine. The way Micah's silence had felt less like absence and more like room to breathe. One morning, her assistant Nico walked in holding a small package. "No return address," he said, shrugging. He said, "Smells like a forest." Lena took it with both hands, her heart skipping. Inside was a small wooden box, hand-carved with delicate lines that formed the shape of a pine tree. She opened the lid and gasped. There, nestled in soft linen, was the daisy necklace, untouched, whole. She clutched it to her chest, tears rising. It wasn't just the necklace. It was the box, the care it had taken to carve. The thought behind it. The time. The kindness. Micah hadn't forgotten. He had seen her, not just the polished, powerful woman the world knew, but the daughter who still missed her mother, who still held on to a tiny flower charm like it was. Everything. That night, Lena stood by her window, the city glowing beneath her feet. She wore the necklace, and for the first time since she left the mountains, she knew she wasn't done there. Something unfinished waited between those trees. Not a question, a calling. The city had lost its color. Everything moved, yet nothing felt alive. The noise, once energizing, now pressed against Lena's chest like a weight. She looked out her office window one morning, the necklace Micah had returned resting just below her collarbone. That afternoon, during a board meeting about spring designs, Lena stood up halfway through a heated discussion about margins and materials. "I need to go," she said quietly. The room froze. Her team blinked at her in silence. "I'll be back," she added. "But right now I need air." She didn't wait for questions. She left the room, stepped into the elevator, and walked out of the building without a coat, without her assistant, without even a plan. All she had was her car keys, and a small wooden box in her purse. The winding road looked different this time. Still steep, still wild. But it didn't scare her. The trees welcomed her back with a whisper. As the sun dipped, Lena reached the clearing. The cabin stood exactly as she remembered it, porch light glowing, smoke curling from the chimney. Micah was outside stacking wood. He turned as her car approached, not surprised. He didn't speak right away, just wiped his hands on a cloth and looked at her like he'd known she was coming. Lena stepped out of the car, heart pounding. "I left something behind," she said softly. Micah nodded. "I know." She crossed the clearing slowly. No dramatic music, no rushed confession, just the sound of wind through the trees and the crackle of the fire inside. They walked into the cabin together. Nothing had changed, except Lena. The days that followed moved slowly like water over stones. Lena stayed, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She slept deeply, ate simply, and learned to listen to silence again. Micah showed her how to plant herbs behind the cabin. They cooked, together, sat on the porch at night, spoke little but said everything in glances and small gestures. One morning he handed her a smooth block of wood. "Thought you might want to make something of your own," he said. She hesitated, then smiled. They spent the afternoon in his workshop, her hair tied back, sleeves rolled. She learned how to hold the chisel steady, how to let the grain guide her hands. Slowly, under Micah's patient guidance, she carved something new, something hers. A tiny fox, a little crooked, a little lopsided, but full of life. The community began to notice her presence. Children came around, curious but cautious. Lena, at first unsure of how to connect, started sketching toys in the margins of her journal. Animals, spinners, wooden puzzles. Micah encouraged her. "They'd love to make these. You've got the ideas, I've got the tools." So they turned the old barn into a workshop. They painted the windows white, sanded benches, built shelves. From scratch, they named it the Hollow Hands, a place for making, learning, and sharing. On weekends, the children came, some shy, some bold. Lena knelt beside them, helping little fingers learn how to shape wood and color it with joy. She laughed more than she had in years. No pressure, no perfection, just purpose. One evening, as the sun spilled gold through the pine trees, Micah brought her something wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a wooden pendant carved into the shape of a pine cone. "For you," he said, a little nervous now. "Heartwood's at the center, strongest part of the tree. Thought you'd want to keep it close." Lena held it in her palm, her throat tight. "It's beautiful," she whispered. They stood together, and her hand found his without thinking. Weeks passed like pages turning in a book written by hand. On a summer evening, the pine trees swayed in the wind as neighbors gathered near the cabin. Wildflowers bloomed around the porch. Laughter echoed from the children's play area near the garden. Lena stood in a soft linen dress, barefoot in the grass. Micah walked to her with a smile in his eyes and calloused hands holding a small box. He opened it. Inside, 2 rings, handmade, simple, carved from a fallen pine branch. One had a small leaf etched into it, the other, a fox. Lena laughed through tears as he slipped it on her finger. "You were never lost," Micah said gently. "You were just waiting to remember who you are." That night, the stars shone brighter than they ever had before. They sat together on the porch, wrapped in one quilt, the air cool and clean. The fire in the cabin glowed steady and soft. "You think we'll ever go back?" Lena asked quietly. Micah looked out at the trees. "Back where?" She smiled. "Exactly. They didn't need headlines. They didn't need spotlights. They had each other. A life carved slowly, with care, with heart. And that was more than enough."